Good evening. Welcome to Reality Checks. The Aarushi murder case has dominated the nation's discourse off and on for the last 8-9 years. Many have believed that the fact that the Talwars were sent to jail was a shocking miscarriage of justice, perhaps one of the most shocking miscarriages that we've seen in recent times. Parents sent to prison for murdering their daughter when the evidence wasn't completely clear-cut. That at least is what many have believed. People have written books on it. Some of them are going to be joining us on this program. Many have commented on this as well. Today, finally, it became clear from the Allahabad High Court that the Talwars, according to the court, did not kill their daughter because the court has acquitted dentist couple Nupur and Rajesh Talwar of the murders of Aarushi Talwar and domestic help Hemraj. Essentially, the court gave them the benefit of the doubt and said that there was no clinching evidence against the Talwars. The court said there was only circumstantial evidence, and they said really clearly that the Talwar couple should therefore be given the benefit of the doubt. The court also said that the CBI had failed to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt and said that the CBI has not been able to establish that no one else could have entered the house during the night of the murder. Now that's a crucial point because remember, during the trial, what the prosecution has said and essentially has been saying for all these years is that there was a sexual relationship between a 14-year-old Aarushi and Hemraj, that they were killed when their parents got them together, that there was evidence to show that they had in fact been sexual intercourse, and that the murders took place inside the flat when both the parents were present, and crucially, that there was no possibility of there being any outside intrusion. To this, in all this period, the defense has been arguing that the CBI's case has only been based on circumstantial evidence, that the CBI's theory of grave and sudden prosecution, finding them together, did not seem convincing and that there was no clear evidence of that there's been no indication of sexual assault, no conclusive proof of intercourse, that the injuries were possible both with a double-edged weapon like kukri and not necessarily with a golf club as suggested by the prosecution, and crucially, what the defense has been trying painfully to point out is that there was no actual evidence that Hemraj was killed in Aarushi's room. DNA blood found of Aarushi's in that room, but not Hemraj. So if somebody cleaned up that room, how was only one of them cleaned up? Also, of course, pointing to the narco test done on the servants who were there and the fact that that was not actually used. These were the arguments that have gone back and forth, and this entire debate has really almost polarized the nation. Everyone seems to have a very strong view on this. The court has now come out and very clearly said that the Talwar should be let out of prison. They have been acquitted. And that's fine. The Talwars will walk out, but we, I think, need to also sit back a little bit and take a look at the human face of this tragedy, which has transfixed, as I said, and polarized the nation for the past few years. Because all of us have questions to answer. If this was a miscarriage of justice, it happened on our watch. There were media channels and members of the press who bayed for blood in the chase of TRPs, in trying to get some way of making it into a more attractive Roman circus than it normally is, demanding that yes, something should be done. They have questions to ask. What actually happened in that civil court which has sent them to prison for 4 years? Was all processes followed? What has been the role of the CBI? And of course the crucial question, which we still don't know, who killed Aarushi? Lots of major questions for answer. And this child is at the face of it. Aarushi, 14-year-old. She was killed. She was murdered. And today, we still don't know who killed her. And remember, her parents, according to the court now, have had to go through the unimaginable tragedy of first losing their teenage daughter. She was murdered. Then having an entire nation speculating about them, calling them the murderers of their child. Their daughter's character questioned, brought into a certain amount of, according to the channels and others, into some sort of disrepute, and then after it all, they went to prison. They have served years in prison and they are still awaiting justice for what has actually happened. So really, this is a human tragedy, and the questions it poses are questions that should continue to haunt us long after the Talwars actually walk out of prison. Now, over the past few years, NDTV has covered this case extensively. The legal aspects of it, the human aspects of it, and others. And we, among the channels that have never really completely bought into the discourse about the fact that the parents are guilty and they should be crucified in the nearest wall that could be found. We've had the occasion to have many conversations with the parents who are now being proved to be innocent, and this is what they have told us over the years.
My life has come to an end. Aarushi and Rajesh were my life. I lost Aarushi 8 days ago. in such a brutal way. And I know with all conviction, 100%, Rajesh doted on his daughter. It couldn't be the way that they're suggesting this.
It was complete hell. It was complete hell. When you're thinking of such a thing and you are not being able to talk to somebody who is, who's close to you, who loves you, it is an impossible thing to bear. I really used to feel that I don't want to live. That was my feeling. I don't want to live.
All right, let me now welcome a very special panel of guests who's joining us here. We are starting off by Aditya Vadva, who is the lawyer of the Talwars. It's great to have you joining us on a day where you must be tremendously relieved actually to be out. We are also being joined by Patrick French, an author who has written about the Talwars and what he makes about it, as in fact has Aviruk Sen, who's written an entire book on how he thought there's been a miscarriage of justice in the case of the Talwars. So it's great to have you with us. Satish Vanishende, criminal lawyer, doesn't completely agree with what many people have been saying out here and thinks that there are many major questions that are still unanswered. Aditya, if I could just start with you first of all. You're smiling, and I think you're entitled to smile today because at the end of the day, the Talwars are going to be walking out of prison. Before I go to any of the others, I just want to get your sense. What happens now? The Talwars, they must have heard about this. They must be overjoyed. We've been hearing from their family and others. I spoke to Vandana a short while back, and naturally they are delighted. What happens next? When do they actually get out of jail?
We are hoping that the judgment will be signed tomorrow. It will come to our hand by tomorrow, and in the next 2 days the Talwar should be out.
So, Aditya, just to ask you this again, if the judgment comes out, then you're thinking that the Talwars could be out in a couple of days. And are you then expecting an appeal? I mean, the legal case could theoretically drag on and on for years to come.
So I believe that if the CBI is to take a prudent approach in this matter, since the initial stand was that Talwars are not guilty and in fact rather that there isn't sufficient evidence to put the Talwars on trial, which is why they had filed the closure report. I am hoping that the CBI will see prudence in not challenging this monumental judgment which has come out today.
We've heard from some members of the CBI, notably the people behind the second report, who've said it's not that the Talwars have been found innocent. The court has said there is insufficient evidence to prove that they are guilty. There is a difference there, and would you agree with that interpretation?
I would say purely looking at it from a lawyer's point of view and from a very pedantic approach, rather a legalistic approach, I would say it's irrelevant, because the question that the court need to answer, that lawyers approach the court and expect the courts to answer, is whether or not a person is guilty in the eyes of law, which means that he is entitled to a presumption of innocence, and whether beyond reasonable doubt there is proof, there is evidence which can lead to a conviction. Every other question is meaningless in a court of law. So I think it's a meaningless question, and I don't think that deserves an answer.
You're saying it's a meaningless question, but for the Talwars, it's not necessarily entirely meaningless. Let's remember, it's not just the 4 years in prison that they have spent. They've been accused of murdering their daughter. They've lost their daughter, which is beyond doubt. The fact is that after that, they've also spent years facing the calumny of saying that you are the murderers of your own child. So the fact that they went and appealed against the first closure report of the CBI was presumably because they wanted to settle that question at rest. And today, even after this, that one big question mark is still hanging over us. Who killed Aarushi? Because we don't know.
Okay, so let me rephrase what I said. I believe that it is a meaningless question because if a person is found to be innocent in the eyes of law, he is factually deemed to be innocent. So it is unfair, it is an unfair criticism that you say that although the person is innocent in the eyes of law, but in the eyes of public opinion, or in my eyes, the person should be guilty. Because it is unfair for you to say that, because not only is that factually wrong, by saying that you are disrespecting the legal system at large, which I think one should not do. And if one does, it's an unfair criticism of the legal system as large.
So that's your response to what certain people associated with the case against the Talwars was saying earlier. Let me just get Aviruk and Patrick into this, and then Satish Manishinde as well, because Aviruk, you wrote a book, and we've done any number of discussions on this. You were here, we were talking about it repeatedly over these years, that in many ways, so Aditya is saying we need to respect the way the legal system has worked, and that's I guess correct for him to take that stance today. They are out, but many people have questioned, notably you, that the way this has gone forward, the way the earlier court had in fact sent them to prison, and they've spent these years in prison, those are years that are not coming back, was based on some of the most speculative of evidences. Why have you believed that all these years?
Because, Vikram, I think the story was laid out, and all of us know this, within the CBI's own investigation and its documents, and all the hard evidence that was there for them to sort of weigh and go into this case. They chose instead to go with the idea of trying to fit fact into a fantasy. And in Ghaziabad, that flew. They sailed through that. But under scrutiny, it comes apart. And that's what happens when you get a learned bench like the one that they got in Allahabad.
And the price of that is 4 years in prison. And the price of that was 4 years in prison. And those 4 years are not coming back.
Not just 4 years, Vikram. I mean, this has been about nearly a decade in hell for the Talwars, because the accusation lingered over them all the time. They had to go through an excruciating trial process where on a daily basis evidence was being manipulated. I mean, we've talked about this before. In what other case will you find a post-mortem report having 6 versions? This is ridiculous. Or forensic reports being swapped, other evidence being suppressed, witnesses being tutored. They had to go through all of that, all the while listening to counsel defaming their daughter in the vilest possible language.
Satish Manishinde, let me just get you in on that point. Look, we now know what the court has said, and the High Court will wait to see whether the CBI is going to appeal or not appeal, but that there were loopholes in the evidence, as Aviruk is saying, is something that we have known now for a long period of time. Saying, for example, that somehow miraculously the blood and the DNA of Hemraj, who was murdered in that particular room, has somehow forensically been removed so that nothing can be detected out there, but Aarushi's blood was still found there. Questions like that, there are major questions that have hung over this for a long period of time. What is your take? Because you're not completely in agreement with what Aviruk and Aditya are saying.
Well, this is a sordid state of affairs that happened in Ghaziabad. That parents were accused of killing their own daughter. One thing that I am certain is that the parents of Aarushi were the only ones in the house when the murder took place. Apart from Hemraj, who was in the occupation of the house as a domestic servant. Now, there is no entry or ingress or even exit of any person, or there is no evidence left in the entire scene of crime to accuse somebody else. So, if at all we consider the evidence that the prosecution provided, forgetting the loopholes, there may be a loophole, there may be botching of the investigation, which normally happens in predominantly most of the cases in our country. One fact is clear, that Aarushi was murdered, her neck was slit in a surgical manner. Hemraj was found on the terrace of the building, where
Mr. Manishinde, if I can interrupt you, this is exactly what you're saying is what the prosecution has been saying for years. And the fact of the matter is that there are actually answers to most of what you have said. It cannot be. By the way, the court has concluded that you can't say without any reasonable aspect of evidence, you can't say without any reasonable doubt that nobody else entered there. There is a version under a narco test. There were the staff said that yes, we were there. We were watching the Nepali thing. We'll get in the Nalini Singh angle. There are various angles there. It is possible that Hemraj allowed somebody in. Those people carried out the murder and left. It has not been ruled out beyond
narco
reasonable
tests
doubt.
are inadmissible in evidence.
It may be
Vikram, narco tests are
inadmissible
inadmissible
evidence, but you
They
can't
cannot
say
be
that
even
it's
taken
been
into
established
consideration.
and nobody else was there. There is a possibility that somebody else was very much there.
Possibilities of somebody else being there is ruled out because there is no evidence found. But the evidence that is found is that Aarushi's parents were at home, there were bloodstains which were wiped out, there was a computer which was fiddled with after the murder, there was activity of the the cyberspace in the house which nobody had access, nobody knew the passwords, there were weapons found, there was a golf club found which had bloodstains, and there was an injury on Aarushi's body with a golf club. There was enough evidence to suggest that nobody had access to the terrace. The key to the terrace was found with Aarushi's parents.
The case.
Hemraj's body was found after 1 day.
I don't want to retry this entire case right now. It's been tried.
So therefore, there is no other possibility that anybody entered the premises.
The courts heard all of this, and
Aarushi's
today the High
parents,
Court has concluded that that
it's
doesn't
very
actually
hard,
prove anything.
hard to
Patrick
even
French,
come
let me
to
just get you
conclusion
inside this.
that,
I don't want to move a little bit. Patrick French, as I say, I don't want to retry the case right now. It's already been tried. We've got a verdict out here right now. Patrick French, let me get you in because you've written about this also, and you seem to be also arguing that this has been a miscarriage of justice in a sense. The way the Talwars were treated, in a sense, reflects on the way all of us have handled ourselves, and many people may have gone wrong out here.
Well, I mean, first of all, I just feel such relief that Rajesh and Nupur Talwar are going to be released from prison, having been first falsely accused of their own daughter's murder, and then sent to jail for the last 4 years. So just relief that justice has at last been done. I have to say that I find it frankly incredible that people even now are appearing in the public sphere asserting things about this case which are palpably untrue. It is impossible to investigate this case in any detail and look at the facts and conclude anything other than that Rajesh and Nupur Talwar were not guilty. They were framed. Evidence was manipulated to imply that there was some suspicion of guilt on them, despite the fact that there was never any remotely plausible motive of why the parents in a loving family of a bright, successful 13-year-old girl would have suddenly changed their entire behavior towards her in order to murder her for no reason. And I think it's a tragedy that even after this acquittal at the Allahabad High Court, there are still people prepared to go out and talk nonsense about the case and try and pretend there's even a faint possibility that they were guilty.
I just want to ask all of you, a certain question that arises out here is the way the system has functioned. Let's assume, we have to assume right now that what the Allahabad High Court has said is correct, that they were innocent and therefore they have spent all these years in jail and gone through whatever they had. I want to come to all of you. Aviruk, in a sense, is there a situation out here where the system can go so wrong that parents can be hounded in this manner, accused of their child's murder, thrown into prison, framed? Nobody really stood to gain from this, and yet somehow it has happened. Media trials were conducted, evidence was cooked up, and they were thrown into jail and treated in this manner. The system really went wrong then in this case.
Yes, I mean, firstly, Vikram, I agree entirely with what Patrick was saying about this relitigation in the public sphere of things that are patently false. To answer your question, I think what this case shows is not perhaps that the whole system is rotten. I mean, no one's saying that dismantle the whole thing and rebuild something. But what it does prove quite definitively is that it's a system that allows a case like the Aarushi trial to take place. It's a system that allows that. So there is obviously some repair work to be done.
Satish, it should be one of the basic principles of justice that an innocent person should not be punished. If that's the basic principle of justice, then as per what the High Court, Allahabad High Court is saying, what is being done to the Talwars is almost unforgivable. Satish, if that's a basic principle of justice, then what's been done to the Talwars is almost unforgivable. Sent to jail, accused of the murder of their children, a campaign of slander against their daughter, again with no evidence. There's no clear evidence that everything we've accused this 14-year-old child of is true. There's no evidence of that either. If you're saying there's no evidence of entry.
the court should not be influenced. The court should not be influenced, and there are a lot of sympathetic stories written about the Talwars, but one has to realize that somebody who has actually committed the murder was, arrested, was prosecuted, there was enough evidence produced in the court. I can assume that no parent will commit the murder of a child, but assuming that Allahabad court is right, I'm sure the state or the CBI will appeal to the Supreme Court. Even if Talwar get an acquittal from the Supreme Court, they will have to answer to God. They know the truth, and they must come out.
You're assuming, you're making an assumption right now for which there's very little evidence, and the Allahabad High Court says is a wrong assumption. So, I think that is something that we should bear in mind right now. Patrick French, last quick comment from you.
So my comment on this is that the murderer of Aarushi Talwar and Hemraj Panjade is still out there. That person needs to be located, taken for trial, and convicted of their murder.
And you think, and again, the aspects of an innocent being punished in this case, is that something that you think is something which all of us need to keep on thinking about? How do we make sure that it doesn't happen again and somebody innocent actually gets punished?
Well, clearly something went very wrong in the system, that that it was possible for two people to be falsely framed for a murder that they couldn't, under any plausible circumstance, be regarded to have committed. But that in a way is a separate issue. It's a structural issue towards looking at how the police system, how the CBI works, how the justice system operates under pressure in India. The main issue really, I think now, is to reopen this case and locate the killer.
Aditya, today what is your view about Rajesh and Nupur will want? Would they want that question to be answered, and are they still hoping that question will be answered? Who killed Aarushi? Or by now are they sort of given up now on that?
Look, that is for the Talwars to say. But if you ask me as their counsel, my advice to them is, look, let us recognize the system. Let us also recognize that the system has been unfair to the Talwars. Now that some justice is being done, the Allahabad High Court has vindicated them. I would advise them to let bygones be bygones and let it be. Move on in life as much as you can, lead the rest of your life as well as you can. And recognize this, and I think that's the one lesson that all of us need to learn from the Talwars' plight, is that the system failed them, which means that the system is capable of failing individuals. So let us try and rectify the system. Let us acknowledge and recognize the fact that this tragedy could have been avoided had the investigating agencies like the Noida police, or even perhaps the CBI, which of course did a reasonably better job than the Noida police. These agencies can improve. Had the Noida police done its job well, they would have surely found out who the real culprit was.
All right, I'm going to have to leave it there. As I said, don't want to keep retrying the case now that the Allahabad High Court has actually spoken. I just want to end by saying that to one extent, the question of how a system can fail an individual, and if assuming that what the Allahabad High Court has said is correct, that's palpably what has happened. The system has failed individuals. Should an innocent person ever be made to go through what the Talwars have gone through, if what the Allahabad High Court is saying is correct, then that's something which all of us have to really sit back and think about and question, because if it could happen to the Talwars, it could happen to any one of us. That's the one big takeaway we have to take from all of this. And of course, today we have to continue to think about Aarushi, about figuring out that open-ended question that may well haunt us for all time to come. Maybe we will never get the answer to that one question conclusively, definitively, one way or the other. Who killed Aarushi? And that's, of course, one of the questions that we're going to just have to keep sitting and waiting for an answer for. You're watching Reality Check. We'll be back tomorrow.